Hey everyone, welcome to Triangle Be Well. I'm your host, Howard Jacobson, and the triangle means two things. One, the Triangle region of North Carolina. So if you're local, we're putting together a wellness community, and I'll talk more about that later on. The triangle also stands for the three things that you need in order to achieve wellness. And this show will be about these three things almost all the time. And the first one is information. The second, skills. And the third is access to wellness resources, access to practitioners. Um, Before I jump into today's show, a couple of announcements for local folks in the Triangle region. This coming Monday, the 14th of December, we have a cooking class in Durham, and the topic is oil-free cooking. So, how do you do stir fries? How do you do soups? How do you do baking without oil? If you're interested in that or any other events, you can go to trianglebewell.com, click the events link in the top nav, and you can find out more and register. Second event, the following Monday, the 21st, for our winter solstice, we're having an informational dinner. That's absolutely free, and you'll get a delicious plant-based healthy meal and interactive discussion about health, nutrition, healthcare, wellness. And that's again in Durham. And again, if you go to trianglebewell.com/events, you can find out all about that. Um, I want to thank our engineer, Amnon Nissan, who is here, who is guiding me through this process. This is the first show I've ever done, and as such, someday I'll look back and think, boy, that was the worst show I've ever done. And I'm so glad I'm so much better now than I was then. So, and that's not an irrelevant point when you're talking about wellness, because all of us, when we try something new, we suck at it a little bit, right? We're unsure of ourselves. We're doing new things. It's not as comfortable as the old things, and so it's very easy at that point to feel silly, to feel incompetent, to get discouraged, and to give up. Quite frankly, right now I am staring into a tiny little camera in a room full of strange equipment and flashing lights, stuff that I don't know what it is or how it works. I have no idea who's listening, how many people are listening. I have no idea who has just turned this off in disgust or is jumping up and down for joy that they found this. And so I'm in a place of significant discomfort. And that's the place at which a lot of us find ourselves when we want to improve something in our lives. And this show is all about improving our own health, our own wellness, our own control over our health destiny. So if you are watching, listening right now, and you have a question, um, feel free to call it in. The number is 919-518-9773. If you're Skypeable, you can Skype computers 2K voice, and the 2 is the number 2, computers 2K voice, and we can get you on the air. And if you're watching this from the Nissan Communications website, you can just go to the chat box and type in questions. In fact, if you'd like to type in a hello there or something like that, that would help me know that this is interactive and I'm not just staring into a tiny little camera lens. All right, so let's get started, and let's get started from the very beginning, from the basics of what we're trying to do here, and that is wellness. And I use the word wellness very deliberately as opposed to healthcare. This is not a show about healthcare, although we will be talking about healthcare an awful lot. And the reason is that healthcare in this country is really not healthcare. It's not wellness care. It's not designed to get us well. Healthcare is really disease management. And here's what I mean by that. You almost never interact with the medical profession unless you're sick. So when you get sick, then you go see a doctor, and you're generally prescribed drugs or a treatment. So those drugs aren't to prevent the thing, because they can't prevent the thing, because the thing's already happened. You can't prevent something that's already happened. So the drugs are there to treat the thing, the condition, the disease, the symptoms, and drugs treat symptoms. They don't deal with underlying causes unless the underlying cause of the problem was a drug deficiency. So, in other words, if you think that high cholesterol in your body is a statin deficiency, then it makes sense. If you do think that, then it makes sense to take statins. If you think that high cholesterol is due to lifestyle, diet, something else, then taking statins is only going to deal with the top level symptoms. It's not going to reverse the root causes. So then we get on, so we get, something goes wrong. We wait until something goes wrong to see a doctor. Then we get prescribed a drug that deals with the symptoms. And then we sometimes feel better because of the drug, right? The drug does make our symptoms feel better. It lowers our numbers. We get better lab results. And sometimes we feel better. And very often the placebo effect kicks in. And we'll be talking a lot about placebo effect. Medical researchers hate placebo effect. Placebo effect means you get better because you think you're going to get better. Someone gives you a sugar pill and tells you it's a painkiller, you will feel less pain. If they tell you it's an expensive painkiller, you'll feel even less pain. If they tell you it's an expensive painkiller and it will have nasty side effects like dry mouth, and you get dry mouth, then you will have a tremendous reduction in pain. A red pill will be more powerful than a blue pill. If you get a placebo injection of nothing much, that will do better than a pill. And if you get a placebo operation, where someone actually will cut you open and then sew you right back up and not do anything, you may achieve total relief because the mind is that powerful. So you may get better from the drug because of the effects of the drug. You may get better from a placebo, but you're not actually getting better, you're simply feeling better. And whatever the underlying cause of your problem, let's say high cholesterol, if you treat it with statins, the underlying cause is still galloping forward. And so there are a whole host of other symptoms, of other disease processes that will eventually occur because you haven't dealt with the root causes. So you may end up with metabolic syndrome, you may end up with hypertension, you may end up with an autoimmune disease, gastrointestinal disease, you may end up with diabetes, you may end up with cardiovascular disease. These are all the same disease. These are all your body weakening under the effects of an unhealthy diet, unhealthy lifestyle. And each of us has our own genetic inheritance. Each of us has our own weak points. So somebody eating a certain way and living a certain way will end up with migraine headaches. Somebody else will end up with endometriosis. Somebody else will end up with kidney failure. These are just like what parts of our body are going to give out. And that's very individualized. But the biological response to diet and lifestyle is a common human inheritance. And there's very few of us who are so genetically gifted that we can withstand a lifetime of dietary and lifestyle mismatch and still end up doing well. So that's the medical model. We're passive until we get sick. Then we go in for a treatment. The treatment deals with symptoms, not root causes. The disease progresses, and eventually we end up on another pill. And sometimes we're on that other pill because of the galloping disease process, and sometimes we're on another pill to deal with the side effects of the first pill. So it's not uncommon for Americans as they reach my age, which is 50, to be on 5 or 7 or 10 pills. Senior citizens, it's common to take 10 or 15, and at least half of them are to deal with the side effects of the first pills that they're taking. So that's the American model. And the pills get stronger, the side effects get stronger. Eventually, pills aren't going to maintain things anymore, so we go in and we cut and we do operations and procedures. The stent is a rite of passage for men in their 50s. The bypass, a rite of passage for men in their 60s. And this is all normal. We'll be talking a lot about normal because whatever is normal, whatever is the norm, whatever else is going on around you, you think, okay, well, I can live with that. And the trouble is, normal is not necessarily what we want. Normal is not well. Normal is not desirable. Normal is not functional, and normal doesn't give us a full lifespan. It doesn't add years to our life, and it doesn't add life to our years. And normal, when you look at this country, is more and more people who are overweight and obese and ending up in nursing homes in cognitive and physical decline in their 70s, 80s. And that's what's normal. And if you want normal, then you can stop listening to this show and stop watching right now, because we are here to confound normal, because what's possible is a great deal greater. Now, you might say, well, that's not exactly true what you just said about medicine, because they tell me to go in for my annual physical exam. They tell me to go in for my checkup. They tell me to get a flu shot, even though I don't have the flu. So they're definitely being preventive. They tell me to go in for my PSA. So they want to prevent prostate cancer, and they want me to go and get my annual mammogram to prevent breast cancer. So you're wrong, Howard. Medicine is not completely reactive. Okay, good point. However, the way those things are done now, they are not preventive. They're simply screening mechanism to catch things earlier. And it's very unclear whether catching things earlier is ever a good idea. We think it is. We've been told it is. But very often catching things earlier means that we overtreat. We treat the wrong people. We treat people for diseases they don't have, or diseases that would never progress. And the treatment is often more harmful than the disease process or the condition itself. So these are really not prevention. These are early detection. When we're talking about prevention, we're talking about undoing the damage by reversing whatever you've done. So if you go down the wrong road for 5 miles, and then someone stops you and says you're going down the wrong road, that's not prevention. Now, if you then turn around and go back the way you came, well, that would be a useful treatment. However, the medical profession doesn't like to tell you to turn around and go back the way you came and reverse what you've done. They just say, well, we'll give you some detours here and maybe you'll get there eventually. And those pills, those procedures, those surgeries are detours. They are not the road to actual health. So what I want to talk about today is a very American theme. It's the theme of freedom and self-determination. This is a really strong theme throughout American psychology, throughout American history, that we want to be free. We don't want anyone to tell us what to do. We want to make our own decisions, right? Doesn't that sound really American? We don't want government to tell us what to do. We don't want our boss to tell us what to do. We don't want society to tell us what to do. We want to make our own decisions. Give me my 40 acres and a mule and leave me alone. And so we want that right everywhere in our lives, but we also want that right around healthcare. We want to make our own decisions. Isn't that one reason that people were so upset about Obamacare, about HMOs, about the way insurance is done, about Medicare and Medicaid? One of the things I keep hearing is, I want the freedom to make my own decisions. I want the freedom to do my own thing. So what does this have to do with freedom? What does the stuff that I'm talking about have to do with freedom? So in the 1940s in Germany, there was a series of trials called the Nuremberg trials. And these were trials of accused Nazi war criminals. And one of the pieces of information that came out during these trials that shocked the world were the experiments, the medical experiments done on unwilling concentration camp inhabitants, on victims. And from there came the notion of informed consent. We think of informed consent as bedrock to medical practice, but it really only arrived in consciousness in the late 40s and early 50s. And the idea was, you can't do things to people medically without their permission. You can't give them drugs without their permission. You can't do surgeries on them. You can't give them tests without their permission. That this became a really important foundation of the medical profession. But it wasn't until 1972 in a case called, I have it written down here somewhere in my scribble, Canterbury v. Spence, that informed consent was made part of medical conversations, that your doctor had to tell you the risks and benefits of every treatment option so that you could decide what you wanted. And this became fundamental to the way we do medicine, the way we do healthcare in America, that you, as a consumer of healthcare, have a right to a complete disclosure, fair, balanced, complete disclosure of the risks and benefits of all your treatment options before you make a decision to proceed. And let me ask you, in your experience, is that what you get? Does your doctor sit down with you when you come in and then they've done a blood test and they said, well, you have high cholesterol? Do they spend time, at least half an hour going through all the risks and benefits? Amnon is shaking his head, no. All right. Well, first of all, they don't have time, right? We're in a time crunched medical system where the managed care organizations are trying to get you in and out like a conveyor belt. So like the line at Costco or the Jiffy Lube line, you've got to get in and out in a certain number of minutes, or else the doctor is going to get some grief that they're not bringing in enough billables. So there's not enough time to have the discussion. Secondly, doctors aren't given the right information by pharmaceutical companies, by medical associations, by their professional organizations. They're given misleading, incorrect, incomplete information, and they're just passing that on to you. If they don't have time to sit down with you for 10 minutes, they certainly don't have time to do what I do, which is to scour the medical literature looking for the best evidence about what works and what doesn't work, and what are the risks and benefits, and who should be taking each path. A third thing is there is a lot of financial hanky-panky going on. If you ask your doctor, do they receive free samples of drugs from pharmaceutical companies? Do they get paid by pharmaceutical companies for attending lunches? Do they get gifts from pharmaceutical companies? You can ask them. Most doctors don't really want to have this conversation, but luckily there is a database of doctors and how much money they take from pharmaceutical companies. And in North Carolina, the doc, you know how much money the doc took in who made the most money from pharmaceutical companies last year? $21 million.
Wow.
$21 million. And that's obviously more than lunches. That's actually, being a speaker, being a lead researcher for their drugs, being a key opinion leader and speaking to other doctors, lending their name to ghost-written articles, the articles written by marketing companies. And then they'll say, well, yeah, you can put my name on that. Being on panels to write the clinical guidelines, the clinical practice guidelines for different conditions. So 21 million was the top. And then there's some doctors who don't take any. Most will take in the hundreds because they'll get invited to lunch and learns. And apparently the pharmaceutical companies don't have to report if it's under $10, if the gift is under $10. So doctors don't like this database. They don't like the fact that it's public. And
Are you saying that it's all legal because it's work that they're doing supposedly?
well, so either they're doing work. So I mean, yeah, some of them are doing work. Some of them are.
I mean,
Uh,
it's writing, it's talking, it's
well,
something. I
it's
mean,
lending their name.
yeah.
It's so do you call it work if someone comes to you and says, "Okay, I want to write an article about how great Logitech cameras are, and I'll send it to you, and you can let me know that it's okay and do any edits if you want, but then I'm going to publish it under your name because we're Logitech, and if we write it." Then people are going to assume that we're biased. But if you write it, you're a well-respected expert, and so we'll pay you for that.
Right. So, but that's different than here's $1 million. You don't have to do anything,
Oh
and
no,
there's nothing on the books that says he did this for us, he did that for us, he gave us his name.
no,
So
no.
it's all done in a way that it's sort of like legal at the end of the day, right?
It's completely legal.
Jeez.
Um, they, if you go in and you click through, so the main website is ProPublica dot I think .org, but just search ProPublica, and then you search dollars for docs, and you can find their database. And there's another one. They're both drawing on the same data. I don't know if there's a way to. I didn't write down the URLs.
Sorry.
We can
Yeah.
I can send it to people later if you're interested. But then you can click on everything. So it says $11.73. You click on it, and it will give you the whole rundown. It will say this was a lunch. So they'll pay you as a doctor to show up to hear their experts talk about their drugs. So you can get lunch every day in the year. The pharmaceutical companies spend hundreds of thousands of dollars per doctor per year, and they're not dumb business people. They're getting something for their money. And I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where someone gives you something even minor, a little thing, and then you still feel a little bit indebted to them. So there was a great study. The study went like this. It was a study of art appreciation. And so you, as the experimental subject, walked into a room, and you were shown pictures of different paintings, different art, and you had to kind of write down what you thought about them. And there was another subject also doing the same thing in the room. And then you took a 10-minute break, and the other person got up and went down to the end of the hall to a Coke machine and bought a Coke and brought it back. But that person was not a subject like you. They were one of the experimenters. Half of the time, they brought back a Coke and drank it. The other half of the time, they brought back 2 Cokes and gave you one. Now, I don't know about you. I don't drink Coke. I would, if someone gave me a Coke, it's like I wouldn't even want it. You can buy it at the supermarket for 33 cents. I can't think of anything less likely to generate a need for reciprocity than someone giving me a Coke without me asking for it. And yet, at the end of the experiment, the other person would say, hey, my kid's doing a raffle at school. They're selling something. Would you like to buy some tickets? And they found significantly more, I think it was 6 times, don't quote me on it, but significantly more tickets bought by the person who was given a Coke.
Guilt.
Well, guilt? Yeah, it's tension that you've done something for me and I feel a need to reciprocate.
I need to feel. I feel a need, or I feel like I should.
Yeah, I want. It's.
I don't want to do it, but I really should because you gave it to me.
Yeah, and there's a book by Robert Cialdini called Influence, the science of persuasion. And he talks that this is hardwired in us as human beings. It's genetic. That the person who reciprocates in a group gains competitive advantage. So all of us feel that pressure that we don't want to be in someone's debt. We don't want to be the one who's just receiving and not giving. So even if you're just going to a $10 luncheon and you're sitting through that and you're listening to these drug reps and the other doctors talk about this drug, you are much more likely to be well disposed toward the drug and toward the company. And that's just for $10. And we're talking in many cases thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions of dollars depending on how valuable that doctor is seen by the pharmaceutical company. And so when you go to that luncheon and you hear about Lipitor, and then you go back and you're prescribing either a different statin or an older one that's off patent, or not just prescribing enough statins because they're keeping track of this, right? So if you're not prescribing as many as other people or as many as the practice guidelines suggest, they'll say, hey, Amnon, what's going on? And you're like, oh, I'm sorry.
Are you saying that pharma companies know what a certain doctor is prescribing? They have a way to know that Dr. A prescribed so many statins and only 10% of it was theirs.
They know the drugstore sales. The insurance
So
companies
somehow they get to it. That's
insurance companies know those details very, very
Can they
granularly.
share
Um,
that you know?
Not clear,
Okay.
not clear. But I mean, here's one way they know. We gave you a big thing of samples. Are you out of your samples yet? Do you want more samples? Right? If you still have a cabinet full of samples, oh, and you know, and who comes like doctors, right? They're too busy to see you for 15 minutes,
Right.
right? So there was a movement to say these drug reps would come in and just hand out their the reprints of showing, oh, look how good this drug is, and doctors didn't have time for them. So the drug reps started bringing food. They started bringing food for the office, right? Donuts. So now the receptionist is like, come on, doc, you got to see them. They just gave us lunch. Look, there's a whole hoagie tray here. Come on, take a break, have some. Then that stopped working a little bit. So pharmaceutical companies then started a new process of hiring cheerleaders. So most doctors are male, so they would hire a demographic of ex-college cheerleaders to be the drug reps who would come in and be very charming, wear short skirts, high heels, stockings, and they found they were getting much more attention from the physicians. So this is all to say, if you pull back the curtain a little bit, you can start to question whether you're getting information upon which you can make informed decisions. So what I want to talk about now is a bunch of ways, specific ways that the information that doctors get is incomplete or incorrect or biased. And so this is let's say your doctor is of utmost integrity, but they're busy, so they have to rely on journal articles, reprints given to them by the drug reps, continuing education courses, journal articles in their journals of practice, and clinical guidelines, clinical practice guidelines put out by panels of experts in their field. So one of them is publication bias. So I want you to imagine, let's say you are going to make a video showing what a great basketball player you are. Do you play basketball?
I
Used to. Do you ever shoot like 3-point shots? You know, like
Yeah.
long shots from the field.
Yeah.
So if I had a camera and we went out to a basketball court and we had 3 hours, I bet I could put together a pretty good edited montage of you shooting 3-point shots, right? You think you could get 10 of them in 3 hours? Probably. Yeah. And depending how good you are, you could get 10 of them in 10 minutes or 2 minutes, or they might all go in. We don't know. Well, you might be the greatest basketball shooter of all time, but once I edit that video and I don't tell you how many shots, I don't tell the public how many shots it took to get your 10 in a row. And, we could even do one of you, with your eyes closed from half court, over the head, right? We'll just keep doing it until we get it. So would you say that if someone saw that montage and was told that you are a fantastic shooter, would that be trustworthy data?
I wouldn't trust it.
No.
There is no such thing as somebody every time. No.
Right. So
Anything.
wouldn't you want to know if I was going to draft you for my basketball league, wouldn't I want to know how many shots you took?
Sure.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing.
So if I were to prescribe a drug or to take a drug, wouldn't I want to know? So let's bring this back to what we're talking about. In order to get a drug approved, the FDA requires 2 phase 3 clinical trials, which means safety and efficacy in a period of months to about a year. That people take the drug and they do better than placebo or do better than the standard of care or better than some other drug. So basically, you're giving people a test and you're giving the drug a test. You're putting some people into the placebo group, into the control group, and some people into the experimental group, the treatment group. And you see at the end, did the people in the treatment group do better? Was the drug safe enough? Were there bad side effects? Is this a good drug? So the FDA requires 2 positive tests. Just like my video montage requires 10 swishes. There is no limit to the number of tests you can do. There's no limit to the number of trials you can do until you get to 2 that have a positive outcome. So, for example, SSRIs, the antidepressants family that Prozac is in, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So the trials that were published in medical journals, in psychiatric journals, there were 52 trials published. 49 were positive, 3 were negative, but they were spun. And I'll talk about spinning a little bit later. But basically 49, so you look at the literature and you look at the reviews and you look at the meta-analyses, because there's people who say, okay, let's look at each individual trial is useful, but if we look at all of them together, well, that's going to give us the best information. So let's look at all 52 trials and combine them as if they're one trial. They'll have a lot more power to our statistics. And they found 49 of them had totally positive results, and the other 3 had partially positive results. So that's a landslide. That's 52 studies, 49 A's and 3 B's. Okay? Well, under the Freedom of Information Act, you're allowed to sue the government for unpublished data. So when all the FDA data every trial that was submitted to the FDA was included, there were 36 trials that showed no benefit whatsoever. They were not better than placebo at all. And those were never published. Okay. And the 3 B's were actually F's. And I'll talk about spinning in just a little bit. But you have to realize that just because there's a bunch of published articles, it doesn't mean that that's all the trials there were. And there's 2 important forces that lead to publication bias. One is the pharmaceutical companies. They don't want to publish their misses. You don't want a video of you throwing the ball and having it fall short by 8 feet, or going over the backboard, or you tripping and the ball bouncing up and hitting you in the chin. You don't want to show people your embarrassing bits, right? We edit it. Pharmaceutical companies don't have to submit their failed trials to journals. And so the trials that they submit tend to be positive. The second thing is the journals themselves have a financial interest in only publishing positive results. And this is because they make most of their money on reprints. If an article gets reprinted, glossy reprint, they could make $1 million on the reprints easily, for just several $100,000. Because think about it, these former cheerleaders are handing out reprints every doctor's office they go to. Here's 5 for your office. Here's 10, and you can't. It's illegal to just go to take the art journal and go to the photocopier, right? Because that's copyright infringement. So the journal itself makes most of their money on reprints, and so they're much more likely to accept for publication an article that they know the high-heel cheerleaders are going to want to print lots of copies of. So that's why just because there are good studies in the literature showing the treatment you're considering is positive, doesn't mean that that's the whole story. And in fact, you could have someone who only hits a free throw by luck every 100th time, and you could still spin that if you just show that one shot and you put good music behind it, and you do it in slow motion, and you do it 3 or 4 more times from different angles. Right? You can make drugs and procedures look much, much better than they are. So that's one problem. Second problem is, we'll call it funding bias, which is So a bunch of researchers were interested in, does the funding for a study influence the outcome? So in other words, if we're doing a study and you're comparing the Logitech camera to some other brand, Microsoft's camera, and Logitech says, hey, Amnon, here's $1,000 for your time, and we'll give you the equipment, and do a study, compare the Logitech speed, responsiveness, reliability, dunk them in water, and and just, we're not going to control the results, but just, I want you to write it up and tell us which one you think is better, the Logitech or the Microsoft. Do you think that it would change the outcome? It would change your results if let's say Consumer Reports came to you and said, could you do this?
No, it won't, because they do that. And I tell them, I say, now I'm going to say whatever I really feel. Oh, that's what we want you to do.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes, I mean, you knock him down. I say, sorry, but that's the way it is.
Right.
But I'm sure that
Now,
I'm in the minority.
I think you're in the minority, but I also think if we asked 1,000,000 people, they would all say the same thing as you. Hypothetically,
Oh, ask, that's right.
Right. You actually have data that you are impartial. Someone else would say, of course I wouldn't be swayed. So the researchers said, well, let's take a look at it. Let's take a look at a whole bunch of studies that received funding from the organization that stood to profit from the treatment versus studies that were funded externally, let's say by the National Institutes of Health or the government of Spain or something like that. And they found that studies that were funded by the company that produced the drug or treatment were 5.3 times more likely to get a positive result. So 400% more likely. And it's because now maybe the Logitech example wasn't so great because those are very clear parameters. You can actually measure things. You have numbers and you can say, I'm not going to lie about the numbers. But when you're doing a drug trial, there are so many moving parts. When you're talking about health, there's so many areas where it could fudge it that it's almost unheard of for a funded study not to come back positive. And you can see this not just in drugs, you can see it for foods as well. Every single study of soft drinks that's funded by the beverage industry shows no harm to soft drinks. I don't know, is anybody out there who thinks that soft drinks are good for us? But over 100 studies or more that there's no ill effects to soft drinks funded by Coke, Cadbury, Schweppes, Danone, Pepsi, etc. So we have publication bias of which studies get published. We have funding bias for which studies, for the studies that do get paid for, what they end up saying. Okay, let's take another bias, which we will call the base rate bias. So if I told you that there's a drug you could take that would reduce your risk of a major coronary event by 36%. We'll define major coronary event as a heart attack, a stroke, heart failure, or death from one of those. You could reduce your risk by 36% by taking this pill. Would you do it? And the answer is yes. Right? 36%. That's pretty darn good. So if your doctor tells you that this pill will reduce your risk of a major coronary event by 36%, you probably would take it. And they say, oh, there's very few side effects and they're mostly minor and they don't affect most people. It's a no-brainer, right? And the drug I'm talking about, I didn't pull 36% out of the air. That's for Lipitor. That's Pfizer's blockbuster statin, cholesterol-lowering drug. So when you look at the actual data, you find that, yes, it does reduce your risk by 36%, from 3% to 1.9%. So that's a drop of 36%. But that number is meaningless. The meaningful number is the base rate. The base rate was 3%, and it dropped to 1.9%. That's an absolute difference of 1.1%. Let's call it 1%. So taking this wonder drug reduces your risk of having a major coronary event by 1%. That means for every 100 people who take Lipitor, 99 didn't need to. 99 get no benefit. One person benefits. Now, the harms are considerable. If you look at the side effects of Lipitor and any of the statins, they are considerable. So if your doctor told you that, and they said, and this is, by the way, these numbers are for people who have not already had a heart attack. So this is preventive. So you just come in, you're high cholesterol or high blood pressure or your first symptoms, you haven't had a stroke or heart attack or angina or heart failure, you're asymptomatic, you've just got bad numbers. Those are the data. So if your doctor told you that, and they didn't say you've got a 36% chance of reducing your risk of heart attack, stroke, heart failure, death, and the side effects are minor, you would take it. If the doctor said this will lower your risk of one of these events by 1%, and you'll have about a 10% chance of pretty bad side effects, would you take it? And the answer is most people would not. Some people would. And I have no problem with that. Because remember, we're talking about freedom. We're talking about informed consent. We're talking about self-determination. If you want to smoke, you should have the right to smoke. If you want to eat cheeseburgers, you should have the right to eat cheeseburgers. I don't believe in the food police or the health police or the seatbelt police. You should have the right to do whatever you want to your own body. But you also, along with that, comes the right to be informed of the true risks and benefits of all of those options. And so the base rate bias is one of the most significant ways that doctors, sometimes knowingly, most often unknowingly, misrepresent the benefits and risks. And this isn't random, by the way. It's not like, you ever go to the supermarket and you get an item and it scans wrong? It's, the price scans higher or lower than the real price. Does it ever scan lower? Right? And they say, well, it's just a random error. Right? So Whole Foods had this problem. They had a random error where thousands of items were scanning too high and nobody was noticing. And they were making profit on this. So it's not random that doctors are overstating the benefits and understating the risks and harms of their drugs and procedures. And you know what? There's nothing surprising about that. If you go to Logitech.com, are they going to tell you all the ways in which their cameras are inferior to Microsoft's? Not even one. We understand that, right? We understand that marketing is the job of taking your product and showing it in the best possible light against all competitors. Because the consumer is saying, why should I go with you as opposed to all my other options? And medicine is a business. Pharma is a business. There's no difference. The only difference is that we've given them this halo of impartiality, this halo of service. They're supposed to be acting in the public interest, but they're just another business and they're just trying to sell their product and make their product look better than all the other options. And I want to be clear here that I'm not blaming doctors. I'm not blaming drug reps. I'm not blaming pharmaceutical company executives. I know lots of people in all these fields. I've been in this field for a long time, and I know lots of good people whom I call friends and neighbors and even family who are in the profession. The problem is not bad apples. The problem is a bad barrel. And if you have a bad barrel, then good apples are going to rot. They're going to do the wrong thing. In order to not be a bad apple in a bad barrel, you have to be a hero. You have to be a whistleblower. You have to sacrifice a great deal for your integrity. And that's a really hard thing to do. And it's not something that we want to ask of people. We don't want to say our medical profession, our healthcare system is so broken that we require people to be heroic in order to function ethically in it. But that's what the situation is right now. So We've gone through publication bias, we've gone through funding bias, we've gone through base rate bias. Um, let's talk about downplaying side effects. And there's lots of ways to downplay side effects. You can downplay the side effects through this base rate bias, through underreporting. You can also do it as a pharmaceutical company by reclassifying side effects and harm. So one of the most famous cases, we've just discovered this through a Freedom of Information Act inquiry, was for the drug Paxil. Paxil was a huge bestseller. It was marketed for panic attacks. It was marketed for adolescents as safe and effective. And we finally got our hands on the data, the raw data, that showed that actually the teens who took Paxil were much more likely to have suicidal thoughts, ideation, and were much more likely to attempt suicide. It was highly significant. That was never reported. It couldn't have been reported for Paxil to become a bestseller by pediatric psychiatrists and for parents and teenagers to take it. And it turns out that those suicide attempts and ideation were all reclassified. Several of the suicide attempts were reclassified as a symptom called emotional lability. Do you know what emotional lability means?
Emotional
Lability.
Oh.
No, me either. I have no idea what that means. Another attempted suicide and failed, and the outcome of that attempt was a terrible headache. The symptom was classified as headache. So all drugs have side effects. In fact, my lead author in Whole, T. Colin Campbell, is quoted as saying, there are no side effects, there are just effects. And these drugs, with their very, very specific mechanisms of action, will always have highly unpredictable effects on the body. But one predictable aspect of them is they're all foreign substances. They're all toxins. Our body does not know how to deal with them innately. So whatever the mechanism that's supposed to lower cholesterol or prevent erectile dysfunction or lower the risk of breast cancer or whatever it is, it's doing a whole bunch of other things that are predictably harmful, even though the exact details are never predictable. Okay, so another way, we're getting a little more complicated here, but see if I can explain it, is protocol bending. So a protocol is, in the realm of drug trials, is simply you writing down beforehand what the trial will be about. It could be details like how many people are going to be in the trial, how many groups, are they going to be placebo or other treatment, are they going to be blinded, meaning they don't know which group they're in, are the researchers going to be blinded, what are the outcome measures, what are we going to use if we're doing a depression trial, how are we going to measure depression, and all those things have to be decided in advance in a protocol. And the protocol is submitted to the FDA, and it's submitted to the journals where the article is going to be submitted for publication. And if you want to be fair about it, so if you're doing Logitech versus Microsoft, you might say one of the measures is going to be pixelation, right? And that's what we're going to measure. We're going to measure pixelation. We're going to measure lag time. We're going to measure zoom. Some of them have zoom. And then you discover, because you've been paid $1 million by Logitech and you've been turned, you're no longer pure Omnon anymore. Now you're in the game, and you discover that Microsoft wins on all of those. Now you've got to find something else. So maybe the Logitech audio is slightly better, or maybe when you do the audio in mono, the Logitech is slightly better, or maybe Logitech only comes in mono, and so the Microsoft in stereo gets mixed down and has a little bit of sine wave interference, and so you say the Logitech is clearly superior. The audio for mono, the audio was much better, and you don't even mention any of that other stuff. So that's what's called bending the protocol. And pharmaceutical companies and researchers do this all the time. And one of the main ways you can do this is with inclusion and exclusion criteria, which is who is allowed in the study and who's not allowed in the study. So if you give people If you want people in a study, let's say there's good reason to exclude certain people. You might discover that certain types of people shouldn't take statins at all. Someone who's had kidney failure, for example, shouldn't take a statin. So you want to screen people and say, okay, everyone who wants to be in the study, they get paid some money to be in the study. They may have this bad problem that medicine can't treat, and so they're very eager to try some experimental treatment. We can't let them all in. It's not ethical to let them all in, and we want to make sure we have a group in the trial that is going to be representative of the population that is going to take the drug. But if you are clever and you have no scruples, you can change the results based on inclusion and exclusion criteria. And one of the most egregious published forms of this, and this is a book that I'm almost done with, it's called Psychiatry Under the Influence by Robert Whitaker and Lisa Cosgrove. And they talk about the trial, the STAR-D trial put out by the National Institutes of Health, US government, around antidepressants. And most psychiatrists cite the STAR-D data to show that antidepressants can cure about 67% of people with depression over a year. And the way they did this, when you deconstruct it, was if you had no deviation from protocol. In other words, if you followed the protocol and you just measured the Logitech, the three things that we talked about, there were over 3,000 patients eligible. About 1,200 of them ended up not being eligible. Sorry. 3,000 were in the study. About 1,200 were remitted, were no longer depressed by the end of the study, which is 38%. Only when you include a whole bunch of people and exclude a whole bunch of other people do you get to the 67%. And by the way, that was after 1 year. When they published the follow-up, they found that about 2% of people were in remission from the drugs. And this is for a condition, depression, in which about 80% of people after a year, if they're not untreated, will get better by themselves. So it was almost 30 times worse than doing nothing. So this was a case where protocol bending misled people. And the protocol isn't part of the published study. So it's very hard to know. You need to have someone doing a lot of digging and getting access to a lot of information to find out that a protocol has been changed, has been bent. Okay. So one more aspect, I mentioned this already, the data mining to find anything positive. So if you do a study and you find out that all of your outcome measures, your drug of choice failed, then you go back in and you look for anything that worked. And you might find that, for this subset, for these 12 people, the drug was better. And then you just publish that and you highlight that and you write press releases about that. One more aspect, and we covered this around the statins, that 3% versus 1.9%, is about clinical significance. So you can have statistical significance. In other words, according to the laws of statistics, this is a real difference, meaning it's not due to chance. But the question is it a difference that makes a difference? So if you're going from 3% to 1.9%, a 1% change, is that significant enough? Or, for example, there was a whole bunch of trials that found that the SSRIs, the antidepressants, were better than placebo. The question is, how much better than placebo? The instrument that was used was the Hamilton Depression Scale, the HAM-D. And they found that on average, when you looked at all the trials, the SSRIs, the drugs, were better than placebo by one number on the HAM-D. So in other words, the HAM-D measures it, from 5, 10, 15, 20. The difference between people taking placebo and people taking the drug was 1 when you average all of the results. So the question is this statistically significant? And I've asked psychiatrists about this. Now, the official position by the American Psychiatric Association is that a difference of 3 can be perceived by the clinician or the patient or both. 7 represents improvement that you'd want, the minimal amount of improvement of symptoms, of mood, of affect. 1 is meaningless. And in fact, I've talked to psychiatrists who say, if I don't get a change of 15, I haven't done my job. But these drugs, which are touted as the cure for depression, were 1/3 the amount of change that could even be detected in a clinical setting. So this is all not to depress you, although it might enrage you a little bit, which it has me. But I want to leave you with this, that if you remember, we talked about the 3 parts of the triangle: information, skills, and access. If you're getting bad information, then you cannot develop the correct skills. You can't take your health into your own hands. And there's simply no point in trying. You're simply unguided in your attempt to get well. So the skill here is being able to learn how to filter the information, how to ask questions, how to talk to your doctor so that you get a sense of, first of all, are they making all these mistakes? And to find out what are the real risks and benefits, to actually advocate for yourself, to be a pain in the butt to your doctor, to ask the question, what's the NNT for this drug? What's the number needed to treat? What are the side effects? How likely are the side effects? What are the percentage of people who had the side effects? And are there other treatments or other things I could do instead of this drug that might have a better risk-benefit profile? So I don't know if we had a lot of chat or callers.
No. We have people are not don't like to get into it.
Okay, so I have nothing to answer. I see.
There's a Ron R in the chat,
Hi, Ron R.
and there's a Chris.
Hi, Chris. All right. Well, it's good. It's not, this is my first time, so if there's not too many people watching me on my maiden voyage, that's cool. 1,110 people. I wish you hadn't told me that.
And they don't get into it.
Now I'm nervous. I wish you hadn't. Well, it's a good thing we're ending. So again, one shout out. The theme music was written and performed by Will Ridenauer on his album titled Will Ridenauer. It's called Dance of Peace. I really like that piece. It's also what I use for my Plant Yourself podcast. If you are in the Triangle area of North Carolina and you want to become a part of this community of people helping each other navigate the healthcare system, I think of it like a GPS instead of just driving around blind wherever the people point you to. Go to trianglebewell.com. You can sign up. You can read my healthcare GPS report. You can take a look at events, and I'd love to meet you. If you're anywhere else in the world and you'd like to consult with me about your health, just go to trianglebewell.com and sign up. And when you get the email, just reply, and we can set up a time to chat. No obligation. And that's it for me for this week. Amnon, thank you so much for your hospitality.
No, thank you. Good information. Great information.
Well, and everybody, see you next week. Until then, be well, my friends.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Health In with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Lessons of Vietnam with NCVVI members, The Tanya Love Show, Your Healthy Pet with Gisela DiCarlo. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by Atomus.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters for professionals, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.